Right, I think it's working. Right, I think it's working. Okay. All right, so we're going to jump right into this. Right, I think it's working. Okay. So basically, the title of the stream was Session 1. So basically, this is pretty much my intro to recording. And I did some streams on this a while back, but I think I want to kind of capitalize a little bit more on it. I wanted to do some acknowledgments before I actually get settled in to the main topic. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that most of these live streams have been pretty much lately. They've been very off the cuff, sort of zany, kind of wacky, ferocious kind of live streams, and kind of going to take a detour from that sort of style. I really want to get more into the, I suppose with this live stream, my philosophy behind recording. Things having to do with time spent in the studio, creativity, that sort of thing. And yeah, and it's kind of the right time of year. The temperature is cooling down, and I have some people in here piling in, saying hi. And again, I will acknowledge to the audience that if you wish to come in here saying hi and introducing yourself, I'm just going to ignore you. I'm not here to socialize. I'm here to teach. So if you're just coming in here saying hi, you're more than welcome to say hi, but I'm not going to acknowledge you, so I'm not here for that. So first of all, the whole process of recording, the whole intent behind recording, is what you need to establish well and truly way before you start buying any gear. And everyone is on their own path with that. Everyone has their own reasons for wanting to record a song. The initial inspiration can come through various ways. Many people start out a musician simply buying a piano, buying a guitar, or even a trumpet, or even an egg shaker, and it's fun. And at some stage during your musical development, you think about possibly making some type of recording. And that can also come about at a time where you feel you're ready to record. You may not feel ready to record. You may feel like you need a lot more musical development. And this kind of branches off into more of the older generation getting into recording, I would say, that doesn't have a lot of experience. When I was growing up, and I'm not going to go way back into the past or anything, but when I was growing up, I learned on a 4-track tape recorder on how to basically start recording my ideas, and a lot of my ideas were crap, as happens whenever you actually start out recording. And over time, you develop your skill, and you widen your knowledge and that sort of thing, and your horizons kind of broaden. And there is a crossover point, I suppose, in that to where your initial passion of actually sitting down to a piano or sitting down to the guitar or drums or whatever can become sort of a technical venture rather than a musical one. And that is that's a point in many musicians' timeline that it becomes a make or break situation. It can do, one of three things. It can discourage you from recording. It can discourage your musical development period and just get you to stop basically doing anything musical. Or, thirdly, it can end you up becoming more of an engineer rather than a musician. And it can kind of, I would say, squander a little bit of initial talents that you might be able to develop had you not have the hurdle of a technical side of the process present. And today, what I want to talk about is basically my own personal philosophy regarding recording, why record at all, why make a song, why do anything artistic-wise as far as music goes, and why make a recording, basically. So first of all, the reason why making a recording is important is because it is taking a snapshot of a moment in time that can oftentimes be very important to you, and it's no different than a painting. It's no different than writing like a poem or anything, or clay sculpture or anything else. Writing a song can be important in ways that can encapsulate or it can freeze a moment in time, basically. Now, what happens is, starting out recording, a lot of people will make a demo and they'll think it sounds great, and that's all they ever want to do. It gets out the idea, it puts out the idea, and it is preserved on either a cassette tape or in a digital recording or anything else, and that's totally fine. What kind of another pivotal moment that happens is when you listen to the demo recording and then you think you can do a whole lot better than that, then you want to start refining things to the point of madness. And that is kind of that's a component of everyone's personal journey, I believe, when recording. Everyone will do that to varying degrees. Everyone will have their own moment of, I suppose, creative madness where they go, this thing has to be the most perfect thing in the world because it's the last and greatest thing that I'll ever do. And it's the sort of thing where I can be on here saying to people to the cows come home, it's best to get the idea out and do it as good as you can and leave it. But that doesn't make any logical sense to the person going through the mental process of that creativity. It is something that has to be gone through on a level where you learn internally the mental processes that go into all the work and everything else. Now, I'm going to pause it there. I think I might have a question here from Alonsum. Let's read. So, hello, question. I remember a song called Winter 1994 or 1944 from your channel, but I can't find it. Did you delete it? No. Basically, I did have a previous channel that had work with my friend Josh Marbury, and we were in a musical venture called Winter 94. And I'm actually unable to locate a lot of that music, but yeah, good question. But yeah, I'm gonna stop it there with that one, and we'll continue along with the subject matter that we're talking about. But yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, it's recording. being as personal as it is, or it becomes a personal thing sometimes, your first ever recordings. I mean, if you're like myself, yeah, not a problem. Alonsum, thank you so much. Um, a lot of the time, um, first ever recordings, like I said, they can be very fun things for myself. My first ever recordings were with my older brother, who sadly passed away 21st of December. But we, as kids, we would have a tape recorder that was about probably the size of like a 9 by 15, like an A4 sized piece of paper, pretty much. And those were the funnest recordings because, you know, being a kid, you just let whatever comes to your mind fly out onto tape. And those are some of the most creative times and most memorable, I think, times that can be just preserved onto tape. And I think also growing up in the 90s, you really very much, that was all we had. You know, we had Nintendo, we had Atari, but other than that, there wasn't anything else to do except play outside. So, you know, playing with electronic gadgets, you were limited, but things like that, you know, like we had tape recorders, and we would spend just hours filling up the tape with whatever we possibly could, whatever came to mind. And as silly as it seemed then, it was kind of an exercise in letting the most rawest, unfiltered contents of the mind just flow out and be recorded. And that's a very powerful thing. And I always, a lot of the time, I refer back to those moments because they're so important in the sense of there was no filter. Now, as adults or even young adults, we move into the process of recording ideas or even drawing, painting, making art, writing stories. Now, a lot of the times with these filters that get in the way, that are pretty much either cultural sensitivity, there can be societal sensitivities and things like that, and subconsciously it's kind of hardwired into people's brains now. Whereas when I grew up, those filters really weren't present. And that's kind of a sad thing now for today's youth that are actually up and coming recording. They already kind of have this inbuilt sense of, well, I shouldn't say this, I shouldn't record this, I shouldn't draw this because it might be offensive to somebody. So that's one whole other thing. But getting back to the initial expression of just sitting there with a tape recorder, it is something really anyone can do nowadays. You can sit down with your telephone. You can sit down, if you want to go old school, you can get a tape recorder. You can sit down and just let your mind pour out onto tape, and that can be a very powerful tool. So all of this stuff, we're kind of coming from the initial concept of the discovery of recording on tape as a kid. Being a very powerful thing that I'll refer back to many times during this. So, from this primordial soup of recordings, then came the listening back to these tapes, laughing and basically just having the best time of our lives listening back to these stupid, silly recordings. But then we learned from ourselves about, hey, this is how crazy and whacked out we can be, you know, saying all this stuff on tape. How much further can we take this? And that kind of then evolved into this sort of storytelling mode of where some of the later tapes that I can remember, I wish I still had them. I wish I still had one of these tapes. But the later tapes became more storyline based and longer and longer formats, which was very helpful to develop a sense of storytelling. And that was kind of the second component that came along. And, you know, by then, obviously, you know, the tape recorders, they kind of fell out of fashion, or at least playing with the tape recorder fell out of fashion. Then it's Super Nintendo. Everybody's into gaming and everything. You're still kind of doing music, but you're in this kind of half world now, to where you're going through middle school. There's all these pressures and things, and you're getting a bit older, a bit more mature. You're no longer a kid. And so then kind of you start to learn then these societal pressures and things, and these expectations that kind of can dull out and drum out the natural responses and the natural kind of impressions that you can express artistically, specifically, even in what you say, the art you do. You're trying to impress a girl, or you're trying to just basically impress other people. So then you start to think, well, this is not really what I might think is cool, but maybe this is what somebody else thinks is cool. And everyone does it to a degree. And this is what, school, other facilities drum out of us over time, the natural artistic expression and things. And that's just, sadly, that's a natural part of growing up and going through development. So at that stage, you've kind of forgot about recording. You're still interested in piano, still, playing guitar and stuff, but now you're more focused on trying to learn the guitar, trying to emulate Jimi Hendrix. You're trying to, just emulate other players. And for me, it was, trying to emulate Keith Emerson. It was trying to emulate popular songs that I would listen to. My mother had a long wall of records that I would try to emulate playing piano. And these parts of the developmental years are important, because then you draw off of professionals. You have an ideal example that you are aspiring to, which can lift your skill. It can basically your own expectations of your own self in writing music, recording music, what actually sounds aesthetically pleasing, what can be achieved, is then you have an example, and everyone sort of draws towards an ideal. And so in that, your own creativity isn't lost. It is developed, if it isn't drummed out of you, as far as having to learn music theory and having to create music precisely, or performances on piano, performances on guitar. If the fun isn't drummed out of you at that stage, that further enhances your own style. And then you kind of, at that point, you kind of set in stone your own cornerstone for how your style is. However flamboyant you are, or however reliable you are at keeping time, or anything like that. And some people pick up better on certain aspects of their ideal music. For me, I picked up more on the trying to do wild and crazy glissandos, because listening to Keith Emerson, listening to the other great keyboard players at the time, and more of like the pop prog sort of scene. So I kind of figured, well, that sounds the coolest to me. That's what I'm going to aspire to do. And so at that stage of development, I'm still thinking, okay, this is really cool. Now I'd like to record something. Now I'd like to sit down and actually, I've kind of gotten my chops down. I want to sit down and I want to now record something that's going to sound kind of like the big players. I want to do something that's kind of an homage to my heroes. But at that stage, your humble, we got somebody commenting here. Alex Jones, Kabbalah music. I have no idea what that means. But anyway, we're going to get back to the topic. So by that stage, you realize, well, your one-track tape recorder that you used as a kid to say all that stupid shit into the microphone, or maybe you didn't have the microphone, you had a little microphone built into the tape recorder, that's no longer going to cut it, because you don't have a band. You're just some shit kicker with a little keyboard, but you want to record something. So then you start looking around, and it's like, okay, well, I heard about some friends at school that they have this thing called a 4-track, right? My friend Will, we got into 4-track recording, and I think he was actually the first one to introduce me to the 4-track. So that's how we got started actually making music. It was me and Will actually recording, getting things down, and that kind of opened up the world, because now I'm no longer working with 1 track, I'm working with a total of 4. Again, technology, the expansion of that made possibility for me to overdub things. We could have a live performance and then overdub the bass and the drums, which set kind of some very basic parameters for us to work with. But then again, it was like, well, this is actually a lot more complicated now. I'm having to learn how to keep time with 4 tracks. How do we do this? What comes first? And then you start thinking about foundationally what's the most important kind of thing. So then in that sense, we kind of just went, okay, maybe how it needs to be is you'll start off playing guitar, and then I'll play the piano, and then we can just kind of jam until then, and then we figure out the drums, and then we maybe just slap the bass on at the end. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But it was the natural learning process of, okay, well, hang on. Now we've gotten so far along, but things are still out of time. So maybe, what if we just put the drum machine on, and then we were recording the, keyboard and guitar on channels 2 and 3, and then we slap the bass on at the end. That actually worked out a lot better. So then we kind of figured out, well, you know what, if we have something to keep time, if we've got a drum machine keeping time, that's setting a foundational part for us to actually have everything locked in. So it was when the 4-track came along, so we've come from working with 1 track on a little tape recorder, now to 4 tracks in our musical evolution. And the technology enabled a lot more to happen, but there was a learning curve. Wasn't a crazy learning curve, but it was a learning curve. And it set the stage for what happened a few years later. A few years later came the desktop audio workstation. Now, before I actually get into that, before that came hard disk recording. Before that came, there was the D16, the Korg D16 that, I saved up and bought, and we used that for a while. That was really cool. And so it then was like, we had Boss recorders. It did the same thing as a 4-track, but now you've got a total of 8 tracks to work with. So that was really cool. And somebody just sent a little laughing emoji. I don't care. We're being a bit serious today, so if it's making people laugh, that's totally fine. I don't care. But so then came 4 tracks, then turned into 8 tracks, and then the Korg D16 came along. So we were working with digital audio at that stage. It was only 16-bit digital audio, and it wasn't a very high. I'm not even sure what the what the quality would have been, but I'm thinking 16-bit recording at the highest. The D16 was capable of 24-bit, but you basically lost all of your hard disk space. Now, what does all this mean in terms of workflow, in terms of the learning curve, in terms of taking away from the time to actually do the thing that you love doing, which is playing music? What does that mean? Well, it meant that this advance in technology, while it brought us closer and closer to this ideal that's up here, that we're thinking, okay, well, all these great bands, and you got to remember this is the time before mass internet. This is the time before you could just go onto a computer and Google for anything, and you'd get all the results and stuff. There was still the internet, but it was very relatively new around that time for us. So we didn't really know what we didn't know. Basically, we didn't know how to search for, how did these bands come up with the sound that they came up with. But we had some idea that they might have used consoles like this. So that when we invested in the Boss recorders, we got the D16, the Chord D16, had a total of 16 tracks. And then, so what the question was then is, the learning curve is becoming a lot steeper now because we don't know how to work with trying to keep time with all these tracks. We're getting tracks lost because, the hard disk would screw up. Now we've got problems with these digital recorders that analog tape didn't have. You would never lose a recording on analog tape because it was just there. There was a physical process that happened, electromagnetic process that would happen. Unless you forgot to arm the track, which of course happened a lot of the time. So the question kind of was that, well, damn, this is a lot harder now. It's quicker workflow, but it's a lot harder because we can't actually see what's really happening. We have to kind of think to ourselves, much like the 4-track, the analog 4-track. Well, this part's coming in here, this other part's coming in here, and we kind of have to anticipate where the bass track's coming in. There was an element of fun to that. But getting back to the question is, the learning curve that occurred started to, because we weren't professionals at it at the time, it started to pull us away from what actually mattered, which was the performance sides of things. All the while not realizing that our heroes sat in recording studios where they had engineers doing all that for them. The sound didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't just mix itself into a grand unified vinyl record. It happened as a result of sometimes 2 or 3 engineers doing the whole process at the same time. You've got a mix engineer, you've got recording engineers, you've got, in some cases, in some albums, you've got, 5, 6 people working on the entire thing. And so we didn't get that. We were just like, okay, we got to make this happen because we got to kind of get the sound that we want. So the pivotal thing happened when the desktop audio workstation became available, really for the first time ever to the prosumer market, which I'm talking about, 2002, and I'm talking what I mean by being available to the public, to the general public, meant shit kickers like me and my friend, right? The little guys, we were like 15, 16, going, fuck, we really want this computer. We really need this computer because we need to have what they have. We need to have what the big guys have. And what about probably a year later, what happened was I got my first job, and I'd saved up enough to buy a Pentium 3 processor computer. I think it was like a Dell or something. And I'm not even sure how powerful this thing was. All I knew was I need to get some kind of a Pentium 3, Pentium 4, the best I can possibly get. And the struggle for me was trying to figure out, well, hang on a minute, well, how the hell do I get the sound inside of this computer? I still couldn't figure it out, because you got to remember, this is the days before anybody knew Jack Diddley's shit. If you didn't have friends or family in the know about home recording, you were shit out of luck unless you went to a music shop and you got schooled and they told you what you needed to get, and which actually did happen a few times. Like I went I remember going into Cache Converters with my friend in Asheville, and there was a guy, I think his name was Liam or something. I can't remember what his name was, but he was really good, and he was talking about a program called SoundForge. There was a program called Acid Studio, Sony Acid Studio, and I had no idea what these things were actually going to look like in regards to how am I going to work with this stuff. And I got to ask him, well, how do I get the sound into the computer? And he goes, well, you need an interface. And he was actually very good in pointing out, at this stage, the audio interfaces, before I was actually able to get the one that I got, which was an external one, the internal audio interfaces that you needed to purchase were these sound cards. Basically, there were these actual peripheral sound cards that had to be slotted in to your computer. If you had a peripheral slot for a 1394 FireWire device, it had to be installed. And these things were not cheap. They were actually quite expensive. We're talking back in the day, $450 for a baseline 2-channel input for guitar. And that was a very steep thing, because I think I paid what, $150 for the Pentium 4, the used Pentium 4 that I bought. And so anyway, that was a bit steep for me. So I had to sit on my computer for a while. I had to figure out, well, how else am I going to do this? I can't afford this thing. I don't even think it was $400. I think it was more than that. And the limitation was that you're only getting 2 inputs. How am I going to plug in the bass, the keyboards? How am I going to do this unless I just run it from a mixer out into the computer? And then, he was saying something about latency. What the hell is latency? It was very much a different world where you had to kind of sit there and wonder, if you weren't proactive enough to ask about how these things came about, you had to sit there and wonder and imagine, and just things kind of just fell into place, because you couldn't just get on a smartphone. You couldn't get on one of these and go, okay, what do I need to make recording? There's no YouTube, there's none of that. So a couple of years went by, and I lost a bit of interest. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to buy another synthesizer. We're still using the 4-track tape recorder at this stage. And then finally, thankfully, the Inspire, and it actually, there was an ad in Musician's Friend for home recording. I remember the actual article. It was on home recording, and they had come out with this brand new line of audio interfaces. And one of those audio interfaces, I think it was actually one of the cheapest on there. It wasn't the cheapest, because at this stage, these little sound cards, they'd gotten a lot cheaper. And I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't really bother with one of those anyway. But this new interface looked really cool. And get this, it came with 4 audio inputs and a stereo output, which was really good. So that was called the Inspire 1394 FireWire recording interface. It was this little blue box that had gray on the top, and the other great thing about it was you could buy 2 units. You could buy up to 4 separate units of this interface, and you could daisy chain them all together for a total of 4, 8, 12, 16. You could have a total of 16 inputs, right? Which was crazy. I never bought 4 of them, but I was finally able to afford the first interface that I ever bought. That came with a free copy of Cubase, which was called Cubase LE. Now, Cubase was a breath of fresh air because, you know, it was the first time I'd ever actually even loaded anything onto this computer. Like, you got to understand, the use of computers from high school, all we basically did was learning how to type. You had these horrible plastic coverlets over your fingers so you couldn't see what you were typing. So basically it was typing, word processing, that sort of thing. But then in high school, things kind of changed because after school, we would all go into the library, in the school library, and we would go onto newgrounds.com. That was our thing, playing games on newgrounds.com, and it was the most fun you've ever had growing up in that era. So you would have had to have been there. But anyway, but this was the first actual program I'd started working with, aside from video games or loading a CD. I had this CD-ROM called One Must Fall. So my computers was kind of limited at that stage anyhow. But I finally had everything together. I had the interface. I finally had Cubase together, and I loaded it up. And pretty much what you see down here, this is not Cubase by any stretch of the imagination, but this is Logic. But Cubase was fantastic because you had a total of, I think, 64 audio tracks to work with, which was mind-blowing. You got to remember, back in the day, for anybody coming from a analog workstation, the most you had to work with was 8. And I'm talking about the Tascam audio recorders, cassette recorders, that sort of thing. But to have 64 different audio tracks that you can record simultaneously, if your computer could hold the stress of the CPU load, you were in hog heaven. You could do near limitless overdubs. You could do crazy things like chop audio. You could move audio around. I could tell you, the first experience with making my first ever cut on Cubase and just moving a piece of audio, like, 2 or 3 bars, being able to duplicate it and hearing that, I've just made a loop of my own sound, of my own, making a stupid recording or making a, like a crappy little drum loop. That was incredible. It was kind of like a dawning of knowledge time for me and for Will. Will used it actually quite a lot as well, and we made a lot of songs on that thing. It was great. But again, there now we are working with a situation. We're now in a situation to where the technology is now kind of at its zenith. Until even today, the desktop audio workstation fundamentally has not changed. The technology is now pretty much at its zenith. That's it. Nothing has really changed until now. So, the learning curve, though, at that stage then became exponentially bigger because, number one, it's a completely different medium. You are working in a digital domain, but not only on a hardware situation to where you can't see anything. Now your world is opened up to a point where the control that you have in this domain is almost limitless. It was amazing. It was fantastic. The stuff that you could do with the audio, you could manipulate audio, you could add effects, you could reverse the audio while it was still there. Basically, you didn't have to run a tape backwards to get a reverse effect. You could just basically hit process. You had to wait probably, if I remember correctly back in the day, you probably had to wait maybe 20 seconds for it to reverse the audio. And you still thought that was the coolest thing in the world, just waiting. It was kind of like waiting for dial-up. So that was really fun. But the technology was just vast. And what had happened was the experimentation started happening with the music making. Now it wasn't just that we had to play the drum beat in time. Now we could set 4 bars on the on Cubase and loop it, and then we could just then cut. We could cut and paste, duplicate, input, 64 times. Automatically, your little loop here was like, zoop, right? So now you've got a full song's worth of drum loops that you can then say, okay, all right, we'll get on guitar, I'm going to get on keyboard, and then we'll put the bass over it and do some vocals. The song is done. And then we hit finalize. It's exporting all the music. It's mixing it all together. And it sounds great. Right. So what's the downside to all this? The downside happened because with all of the possibilities with digital audio, working within a workspace where we can actually see the waveforms, we can manipulate the waveforms, we can do all sorts of stuff, we can duplicate, we can now, okay, we don't like this little part of this drum loop here, let's take that out, let's reverse it, let's do something else with this, let's, maybe let's even just cut out a whole section here and take this section and paste it over here, right? And then duplicate that a few times. What started to happen was that the process of making the music was changing rapidly and not in a very musical way. It became it got to the point where the musicality, the originality, I'm trying to find the word, the impulse to just, okay, all right, let's do a second take because we're all just on tape, right? But no, we're not. You don't have to do a second take. All you have to do now is take and say, okay, you don't like this little piece of guitar, you can just pull it back here and then, duplicate it 3 times and it sounds fine anyway, right? Now we're coming to the part where we have too much control. We have too much control over too many parameters, over too many ways that we can perfect it without having to actually play the music. Now, I'm the one that's most guilty for that. I will say that Will actually, at a certain point, I think what happened with Will was he was like, look, it just sounds too repetitive. It sounds too perfect. Where's the live performance? And, I respect him for that. But I was still kind of pushing. I was like, okay, we could do this, this, and this. But the musicality was kind of getting sucked out of the recordings. So where are we now on our timeline? We're now coming from many years ago, starting out on tape, on a simple one-track tape recorder, sitting around recording crazy stories, now to the point where we're at digital audio workstations, all right? The musicality was getting to the point where it was no longer being musical. The learning curve on how to then get the recordings to sound good in a digital environment, and there was another component coming up, which was radio ready. How do you get this thing sounding loud enough? How do you get this thing sounding good enough? Because now that we've actually exported these recordings, they're sounding harsh. They're sounding like, distorted. We're getting these abnormalities where it's like now we have to sound good enough to go on the radio. So it was like, there's this whole other quantum leap forward now to where here's our desktop audio workstation, here's Cubase, and we're having fun with this, to now we're at this stage where we're here trying to get to this plateau of getting things to sound like they should sound on the radio. So again, if we didn't have the technical side removing us from the process of actually making the music, the most important thing was sitting there playing the piano, playing the drums, playing the bass. The human input was becoming more and more removed from that process, because in an attempt to get to radio ready, how do we get this thing to sound good? So then we're getting into having to learn how to mix properly, how to then master, which was another even a higher step up from that. Because you got to remember, at this stage, unless you went to a music school that taught this stuff back in the early 2000s, you would be paying big moolah, big money to to learn that stuff, which is what nowadays we can still, and I'm going to get hate for this, but you can learn a lot from trial and error. You can learn a lot from mixing on really bad headphones. You can learn a lot from mixing and mastering on really shitty speakers, right? You can learn a lot from tutorials. You can learn a lot from trial and error. But back in the day, the big kids on the block were like, I just come out of music school. I know how this should be, and you guys don't know shit about jack, basically, right? So there was that whole other tier of musicians, of kind of emerging engineers that had that knowledge. It was very expensive knowledge, but you weren't in the game, right? I wasn't in the game. Nobody was in that game because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford the knowledge. When YouTube got going, finally, not actually when YouTube kicked off, because there was a lot of misinformation. There's still a shitload of misinformation on YouTube on how to get things to sound good, or how you want things to sound. There was a stage probably around 2010, 2011 where things kind of got to the point where, okay, now we have some solid information where we can actually see these things coming to fruition about these promises that, oh yes, this actually does sound better. This actually works. I've tried this, and now my process is so much better. And so somewhere along that whole thing, it became this series of this leapfrog effect to where now we have to learn. But here's making music, right? At the very beginning, here's making art. Here's making something that actually matters. Here's saying something that's unfiltered. This tiny little speck on this very long timeline that is now left in the past, right? We're here now and making music, expressing yourself, not being afraid to say something that pisses people off, or just, recording what you really want to record and just doing it your way is now very much in the past. It's very much something that a lot of the time you only hear on a record. You might hear on an early recording of a demo of where you're just getting a solid performance. You're getting someone playing a guitar, playing their heart out. They're not caring about, is this going to sound loud enough? Is this going to translate onto 10 different sound systems? Is this going to sound good in the car? I'm worried about what this other guy's tone is using, because last Friday this video got put out about this tone sounds better than this one, or this keyboard sounds better than this one, and what the fuck should I do, right? We're at that stage still now of where we're comparing. It was kind of the age then of comparing. Everyone is comparing their own shit to somebody else's, and then it's like, oh, well, no, that doesn't work. Maybe I need to do something else. So the whole entire point behind this discussion, or this live stream, which is probably nearing its end, is that the single best piece of advice I can give, not being a professional, I'm not a professional, but I can give you this little single piece of advice. The most important thing that you can possibly focus on is recording something that sounds genuine, that is an emotionally involving performance. So you are really putting your heart and soul into whatever you're recording. And I'm not talking about gear. I'm talking about, you can be sitting there with a Livingstone guitar, like a shitty Squire or whatever. You know, Squires aren't shitty, but you can be sitting there with a guitar, anything. If you can record it where you're putting a part of yourself into that, and if you're starting out recording, if you just wanting to get into the recording thing, focus primarily on that, and don't lose sight of that. An emotionally appealing performance, not your best performance, not your most technically perfect performance, but your most emotionally appealing, emotionally engaging performance is so much more important than your perfected performance, right? That song or that demo that might sound a bit harsh or whatever, but that gives you your best, most emotional performance is the one you should keep. Why is that? Well, if you think about it like this, have you ever heard a song, it might have been recorded back in the day, maybe like early 1960s, like Motown or something, or 1960s rock, where a lot of these engineers, they were just starting out. They really didn't know a lot about what they were doing. They didn't know everything. They had some basic knowledge, but you got to remember they were still learning. The craft was still being created at that stage. These bands were the talent. The recording engineers were part of the talent, but they were there to do a separate job, right? Your job first is a musician. There's another component to that before I even get into the other part, but you're a musician, but if you want to make compelling music, if you want to make something that actually stands out from the crowd, you are also, the other part of that, the component is you are a storyteller. You are able to convey the human condition accurately and artistically and originally, okay? You are those two things, right? You're not necessarily an engineer. You're not necessarily a mix professor. You're not a mastering engineer. You are someone who makes good music, right? That's what you need to focus on. Now, getting back to these early bands that you might have heard, okay, there's some examples. Some early Motown was recorded where the drums are just like blasting, right? And the bass is just overpowering stuff. And these background vocals are just kind of just coming over the bandwidth of the whole dynamic range is just out of whack, Things are just panned crazily. But there's one track in this whole thing. It might be the vocal. It might be the guitar that stands out in this track that sounds the best. There's at least one thing in there that just draws the listener, and it grabs them emotionally. And what a bad recording can do, that emotional content, even through the lyrics in the vocals, distorted vocals coming through that has an emotional impact, that nullifies any bad quality that might be there in the recording. This happens a lot. Same with early rock music. A lot of early rock music was recorded in a room with a single microphone, sitting in a room with basically no acoustic treatment, and you had maybe a group of four musicians in there playing their heart out because they were the talent. They were going in there with one fucking chance, or they were going to get sent home on the fucking train back to fucking Arkansas with their one chance that they saved up, putting in Coke bottles, trying to get the money to go and record. They're going fucking home, right? That's where you get the performance of a lifetime that was recorded, and not in an ideal situation, but you got the best recording of all time. This is what I'm trying to say. So, what my advice to you is, don't focus on the gear. Don't focus on what you've got. Even if you've got great fucking gear, don't focus on the greatness of your fucking gear. I'm telling you right now, I've got some great gear in here. I've got an RG-2000 stage piano. I've got a Hammond organ over here. I've got all the stuff that I could possibly need to record and do my very best, right? I can't focus on that, or I'm going to be focused on the gear. I'm not focused on my own talent. But also, I haven't got the pressure of being sent home to fucking Arkansas because I'm not making a flash recording either. You know, I've got time to sit up here and then think about how I'm recording. So think about it in the sense that remember those early recordings. Remember these early fucking blues recordings, right? Elmore James, greatest, in my opinion, greatest blues guitarist, blues singer ever, sat in a room with one microphone, and he gave every performance as the most soulful, emotionally compelling performance you could possibly hear. And it was just him, his guitar, and later they kind of, well, I mean, multi-track recording wasn't really available back then, but there was a crossover period where it was. But they had some musicians in the background. They might have been on the drums. Somebody might have been plunking on the bass, upright bass. But that's what you got. But even though the rest of the stuff might not have sounded fidelically perfect, you got Elmore James pouring his heart out into these recordings. And that's how you need to be as an aspiring recording musician, or anybody who wants to do anything compelling regarding creating art, creating music. So think about it that way. Don't focus on your gear. Don't focus on the shittiness of your gear. If you got shitty gear, don't focus on that. Be glad that you got anything. But be most glad of all that you have the talent and you have the drive and that you genuinely want to create something that is going to please yourself. And that's the other component of this. That's the last thing I'm going to say before I leave for the evening. But don't make music for other people. Okay? Make it for yourself. Okay, and with that said, I'm going to go now, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. See you all in the next one.